The letter arrived on a blustery spring day in 1875, when the wind carried both promise and dust across the plains of Nebraska territory. Wyatt Ingram stood on his porch, weathered hat in hand, staring at the cursive handwriting that would change his life forever. "She's coming next week," he muttered to himself, a mixture of anticipation and fear knotting his stomach as he folded the letter from Zenobia Smith, his mail-order bride from Boston. Wyatt had never imagined himself desperate enough to send away for a wife. At 32, he had built a respectable ranch 5 miles outside of Nebraska City, Nebraska, with enough cattle and crops to be considered successful by most standards. But the loneliness of prairie nights had finally broken his resolve. What he hadn't expected was a bride who, according to her letters, was not just seeking a husband but a place to practice her medical skills. "A doctor woman," he said to the empty house behind him. "What will folks around here make of that?" The following Tuesday found Wyatt shifting uncomfortably on the platform of the Nebraska City train station. His best shirt chafed at his neck, freshly shaved skin still stinging from his hurried morning preparations. The 2 o'clock train from Chicago whistled in the distance, and his heart hammered against his ribs with each passing second. When the locomotive finally lurched into the station amid clouds of steam and coal smoke, Wyatt removed his hat and smoothed back his sandy hair. Passengers began to disembark, businessmen in suits, families with children, and then, near the end, a solitary woman with a worn medical bag clutched in one hand and a small trunk being handled by the porter. She was nothing like the picture she had sent. Where the photograph had shown a serious-faced woman with her hair pulled severely back, this woman's chestnut hair escaped in wisps from beneath her bonnet, framing a face that was both delicate and determined. She was tall for a woman, with intelligent blue eyes that scanned the platform until they found him. "Mr. Ingram," she called, walking directly toward him with a confidence that caught him off guard. "Miss Smith," he replied, bowing slightly. "Welcome to Nebraska City." Her handshake was firm, almost professional. "Zenobia Smith. Though most call me Zenny, I hope your journey from Boston was comfortable." "As comfortable as 30 hours on a train can be," she replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I appreciate you meeting me." As they loaded her trunk onto his wagon, Wyatt couldn't help but notice the careful way she placed her medical bag on the seat between them, as if it contained precious jewels rather than the instruments of healing she had described in her letters. "I should be direct, Mr. Ingram," she said as they pulled away from the station. "I came here because your letter mentioned the lack of medical care in this region. While I understand the arrangement we've made, I want to be clear that my primary purpose is to practice medicine." Wyatt glanced at her profile, strong against the afternoon sun. "You mentioned your medical training in your letters, Miss Smith. I respect that, but most folks around here might take some convincing to trust a woman doctor." "They usually do," she replied, and this time her smile held a touch of weariness. "I completed my training at the New England Female Medical College. I've spent 3 years working in Boston's poorest neighborhoods. I assure you, Mr. Ingram, I am qualified. I don't doubt it. Just warning you that Nebraska City isn't Boston." "That's precisely why I'm here," Zenobia said, turning to face him fully. "In Boston, there are dozens of physicians. Here, from what you've told me, the nearest doctor is in Omaha, nearly 50 miles away. People need me here." The truth in her words silenced Wyatt momentarily. He had written to her about the lack of medical care after his neighbor's wife had died in childbirth, the doctor unable to reach them in time. What he hadn't expected was for his mail-order bride to take that as her primary reason for agreeing to the marriage. "I should also be clear about our arrangement," Wyatt said carefully. I advertised for a wife, not just a town doctor. Zenobia's shoulders stiffened slightly. I understand that, Mr. Ingram. I wouldn't have agreed if I wasn't prepared to honor that commitment, but I hope you understand that my vocation is not something I can set aside. The wagon hit a rut in the road, jostling them both. Wyatt steadied the reins and considered her words. He had expected a woman looking for security, perhaps even desperate enough to marry a stranger. What he'd gotten was a woman with purpose, determination, and skills that his community desperately needed. "We'll make it work," he finally said. "There's a small building in town that used to be the cobbler's before he moved to Omaha. It's been sitting empty for months. Could be turned into a clinic, I suppose." The transformation in Zenobia's face was immediate. Her eyes brightened, and a genuine smile crossed her lips. "You would help me establish a proper clinic." "Seems the right thing to do," Wyatt replied, oddly pleased by her reaction. "But there's matters to settle first. We've got papers to sign at the courthouse, and you should probably rest after your journey." "Of course," she agreed, though her gaze had already shifted to the town appearing on the horizon. "I'm eager to see what facilities might be available." As they drove into Nebraska City, Wyatt pointed out the main landmarks: the general store, the bank, the church, and finally the vacant cobbler's shop, a modest wooden structure with large windows facing the main street. "It's perfect," Zenobia breathed, her focus entirely on the building rather than the curious stares they were receiving from townspeople. "Good natural light, central location. It would need proper shelving for medicines, a treatment table." "Whoa there," Wyatt said with a chuckle. "Let's get you settled first. We've got a wedding to arrange before we start building you a hospital." The reminder of their arrangement brought Zenobia back to the present moment. "Yes, of course. I apologize for getting ahead of myself. It's just that I've dreamed of having my own practice for so long." "No need to apologize for passion," Wyatt replied, surprised by the warmth in his own voice. "It's just that folks around here will expect certain proprieties to be observed." They continued to the courthouse, where the Justice of the Peace, Mr. Holloway, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. As they filed the necessary paperwork, Wyatt couldn't help but notice how Zenobia's hand trembled slightly when she signed her name, the only outward sign that she might be nervous about marrying a stranger in a strange land. "Wedding can be arranged for this Sunday after church," Holloway said, stamping the papers. "That give you enough time, Ingram?" "Should be fine," Wyatt replied, glancing at Zenobia. "That work for you?" she nodded, a mixture of emotions crossing her face too quickly for Wyatt to interpret. "Sunday will be fine." The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. Wyatt arranged for Zenobia to stay at the boarding house run by widow Harriet Palmer, a formidable woman with a soft spot for Wyatt since he'd helped repair her roof the previous winter. A mail-order bride who's a doctor. Mrs. Palmer had exclaimed when Wyatt explained the situation. "Well, I never. But I suppose we could use a woman with healing knowledge around these parts." Zenobia spent her days exploring Nebraska City, introducing herself to shopkeepers and families, always carrying her medical bag as if ready to be called into service at any moment. Wyatt found himself watching her from a distance, admiring her determination even as he wondered if she would ever look at him with the same passion she had when discussing her clinic. On the Thursday before their wedding, opportunity knocked unexpectedly. Wyatt was showing Zenobia the empty cobbler's shop, discussing potential renovations when shouts erupted from down the street. A man came running toward them, his face pale with fear. "Help, anyone! My boy's been kicked by a horse. He's bleeding something awful." Without hesitation, Zenobia grabbed her bag. "Take me to him immediately," she commanded, her voice suddenly authoritative. The man looked uncertainly at Wyatt, who nodded. "She's a doctor from Boston. Best chance your boy has." They followed the frantic father to a house at the edge of town, where a 9-year-old boy lay on the kitchen table, his mother pressing a bloodied cloth to his head. The gash across his forehead was deep, blood pulsing with each heartbeat. "Everyone back," Zenobia ordered, opening her medical bag. "I need clean water, as much light as you can provide, and any whiskey you have in the house." Wyatt stood transfixed as Zenobia transformed before his eyes. Gone was the somewhat reserved woman he'd met at the train station. In her place stood a confident physician, her movements precise as she cleaned the wound, administered chloroform, and began to stitch the boy's forehead with tiny, even sutures. "Hold the light steady," she instructed Wyatt, who had taken on the role of assistant without being asked. Their eyes met briefly over the child's body, and something unspoken passed between them, trust, perhaps, or mutual respect. An hour later, the boy was resting comfortably, his head bandaged, with strict instructions for care written in Zenobia's neat handwriting. "You saved him," the mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The last time someone was kicked like that, old Dr. Williams couldn't save him. He'll have a scar, but with proper care, he should heal completely," Zenobia replied, washing blood from her hands in a basin. "I'll return tomorrow to change the dressing." As they walked back toward town in the fading light, Wyatt found himself seeing Zenobia with new eyes. "You were remarkable in there," he said quietly. She looked up at him, fatigue evident in her face but a certain satisfaction in her eyes. "It's what I was trained to do, what I must do." "I understand that now," Wyatt admitted, "and I think the town will too after word of this spreads." By the time they reached the boarding house, 3 more townspeople had stopped them, each inquiring whether the rumors were true. Was there really a woman doctor in Nebraska City? "Seems you won't lack for patients," Wyatt observed as they stood on the boarding house porch. "I'll start work on the clinic tomorrow. Can't have you treating folks on kitchen tables forever." Zenobia's face softened in the lamplight. "Thank you, Wyatt. Not every man would be so supportive of a wife with professional ambitions." "Not every man is marrying a woman who can save lives," he replied simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "I'm beginning to think I got the better end of our arrangement, Miss Smith." A flush colored her cheeks. "Perhaps we should reserve judgment until we've been married more than 0 days, Mr. Ingram." Their wedding on Sunday was a simple affair. The church was unexpectedly full, many attendees drawn by curiosity about the female doctor as much as by respect for Wyatt. Zenobia wore a dove-gray dress with lace at the collar, not traditional white, but practical enough to be worn again. Wyatt found himself strangely nervous as he watched her walk down the aisle, her eyes meeting his with a calm determination that somehow steadied him. The vows were traditional, though Wyatt noticed Zenobia hesitate almost imperceptibly at obey. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt leaned down for a chaste kiss that was meant to be brief. But something sparked between them, perhaps the shared tension of the moment or the promise of their future together. And the kiss lingered a heartbeat longer than propriety might dictate. The community had organized a small reception at the church hall, where Zenobia was immediately surrounded by women eager to discuss various ailments and remedies. Wyatt watched from across the room, nursing a cup of punch and fielding congratulations from fellow ranchers and farmers. "She's not what I expected when you said you'd sent away for a bride," remarked Thomas Jenkins, Wyatt's closest neighbor, a lady doctor. "But after what she did for the Miller boy, folks are saying she's a godsend." "She is something special," Wyatt agreed, his eyes finding Zenobia in the crowd. As if feeling his gaze, she looked up and offered him a small, private smile that warmed him more than any summer sun. Later that evening, Wyatt drove his new wife home to his ranch. The house wasn't grand, a four-room wooden structure with a stone foundation, but he had spent the week preparing for her arrival, adding feminine touches like curtains and a proper dresser in the bedroom. "It's lovely," Zenobia said as he showed her around, though he could see she was assessing everything with a practical eye. "Did you build it yourself?" "Most of it," Wyatt admitted. "Added the kitchen 2 summers ago. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Keeps the heat in winter and stays cool enough in summer." When they reached the bedroom, an awkward silence fell between them. Zenobia stood near the window, her fingers tracing the pattern on the curtains. "I had Mrs. Palmer help me choose those," Wyatt said, filling the silence. "Never had much call for decorating before." "They're perfect," Zenobia replied, then turned to face him directly. "Wyatt, I think we should discuss expectations. I know what traditional marriage entails, but our circumstances are unusual." Wyatt nodded, appreciating her forthrightness even as his collar suddenly felt too tight. "I respect that this isn't a love match, Zenobia. I won't push for more than you're comfortable with." Relief softened her features. "Thank you. I do intend to be a proper wife, but I would appreciate some time to adjust to all these changes." "We have time," Wyatt assured her. "And tomorrow we'll start work on your clinic. That cobbler's shop won't transform itself." The tension broke, and Zenobia smiled a full, genuine smile that reached her eyes and made Wyatt's heart skip in a way he wasn't prepared for. "You're a good man, Wyatt Ingram. I believe I made the right choice in coming here." The next morning marked the beginning of their shared life and the creation of Zenobia's clinic. Wyatt had already spoken with the town's carpenter, and by mid-morning, plans were being drawn for examination tables, shelving, and a separate area for patients awaiting treatment. "Nothing fancy," the carpenter, Mr. Cooper, warned, "but sturdy enough for your purposes, Mrs. Ingram." "Dr. Smith Ingram, if you please," Zenobia corrected gently but firmly, "and sturdy is exactly what I need." Word of the clinic spread quickly, and over the next 2 weeks, the community's initial curiosity transformed into something Wyatt hadn't expected: enthusiastic support. Farmers' wives brought food for the workers. The general store owner offered discounted supplies. Even the town's most conservative residents seemed to soften their stance after Zenobia successfully treated a case of croup that had threatened the minister's youngest child. During this time, Wyatt and Zenobia established a routine that allowed space for both their marriage and her medical practice. Mornings began early with shared breakfast and chores around the ranch. Wyatt would then drive Zenobia into town, where she would see patients in a temporary space behind the general store while work continued on the clinic. In the evenings, they would return home together, sharing the day's events over dinner. Their physical relationship progressed slowly, beginning with holding hands during their drives into town, occasional touches as they passed each other in the house, and finally, almost 3 weeks after their wedding, a kiss initiated by Zenobia that left them both breathless and led to their first night truly together as husband and wife. The next morning, Wyatt awoke to find Zenobia studying his face in the early dawn light. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, only half joking. "Quite the opposite," she replied, her finger tracing the line of his jaw. "I'm thinking that I've been extraordinarily fortunate. Many women in my position would have found themselves married to men who would have crushed their ambitions rather than nurturing them." Wyatt captured her hand and kissed her palm. "Many men would have found themselves married to ordinary women rather than brilliant doctors who can set bones and stitch wounds without flinching." "I do flinch," she admitted with a soft laugh. "Just never when the patient can see." As spring turned to summer, the clinic neared completion. Wyatt had spent every spare moment working alongside the carpenter and other volunteers, determined to create a space worthy of Zenobia's skills. The result was a clean, well-lit building with 2 examination rooms, a waiting area, and a small office where Zenobia could keep records and medical texts. The day before the official opening, Wyatt brought Zenobia to see the finished clinic. He had made one final addition, a sign above the door that read Dr. Z. Smith Ingram, physician and surgeon. "Oh, Wyatt," she breathed, her eyes filling with tears as she traced the letters of her name. "It's perfect." "Not quite," he replied, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. "One more thing." Inside was a brass plaque for her desk, inscribed with the same title as the sign. "So there's no confusion about who's in charge here," Wyatt explained. Zenobia's response was to throw her arms around him, heedless of who might see them embracing in the middle of Main Street. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered against his chest. The clinic's opening day confirmed what they had already begun to realize: Nebraska City had not only accepted Zenobia, but embraced her. Patients arrived from sunup until well past dusk, some traveling from neighboring towns upon hearing that a skilled physician had established practice in the area. By the end of that first week, Zenobia was exhausted but exhilarated. "I never imagined such a response," she told Wyatt as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "In Boston, I fought for every patient, constantly having to prove myself. Here they just accept me." "They accept you because they've seen your skill," Wyatt replied, taking her hand. "And because you respect them. You don't talk down to farmers or treat their wives like they're simple because they haven't been educated in cities." Zenobia leaned against his shoulder. "I believe I'm falling in love with this town and its people." She paused, then added softly, "And my husband." Wyatt turned to look at her, surprise and joy mingling in his expression. "Are you now?" "Thoroughly and completely," she confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. "Is that going to be a problem, Mr. Ingram?" He laughed and pulled her closer. "Only if you object to being loved in return, Dr. Smith Ingram." As summer progressed, their love deepened alongside Zenobia's connection to the community. The clinic thrived, with Wyatt often helping with administrative tasks in the evenings or assisting during particularly busy periods. What had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into a partnership neither had anticipated. Their first major challenge came in late August when a fever swept through town, affecting mostly children and the elderly. Zenobia worked tirelessly, moving from house to house when patients were too ill to come to the clinic. Wyatt supported her efforts, delivering medicines, helping to cool feverish patients, and ensuring Zenobia ate and rested when she could. "You should stay away," she warned him one evening as they headed to yet another house call. "I can't be certain it's not contagious. If you're exposing yourself to risk, I won't let you do it alone," he replied simply. For 2 weeks, they battled the fever together. Zenobia lost 3 patients, an elderly man and 2 young children, each loss hitting her with devastating force. After the second child died, Wyatt found her sitting behind the clinic, her face buried in her hands. "I should have been able to save him," she whispered as Wyatt sat beside her. "In Boston, we had access to newer treatments, research papers, consultations with specialists. You did everything possible," Wyatt assured her, drawing her into his arms. "More than anyone else could have done. Without you, we might have lost dozens instead of 3. That's what medicine is here, counting the ones we didn't lose rather than mourning the ones we did." Her voice was bitter with exhaustion and grief. "It's what medicine is everywhere," Wyatt said gently. "You told me once about the children you couldn't save in Boston, remember?" "This isn't failure, Zenobia. This is the reality of healing." She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "When did my cowboy husband become so wise about medicine?" "When he married a doctor who talks in her sleep about treatments and symptoms," Wyatt replied, relieved to see a small smile flicker across her face. The fever eventually subsided, but the experience transformed their relationship. The shared crisis had forged a deeper bond between them, one built on mutual respect, trust, and the knowledge that they were stronger together than apart. By autumn, Zenobia had established a regular schedule at the clinic, seeing patients 3 days a week and making house calls as needed. This arrangement allowed her time to help on the ranch and to study the medical journals Wyatt arranged to have delivered from Omaha. One crisp October morning, as they sat at breakfast, Zenobia placed her coffee cup down with unusual deliberation. "I believe I may need to adjust my schedule at the clinic soon," she said carefully. Wyatt looked up from his eggs. "Oh, getting too busy. We could talk to Mrs. Palmer's niece about helping with the record keeping." "That's not it," Zenobia replied, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I believe I may need to reduce my hours somewhat, around April or May." Wyatt's fork clattered to his plate as understanding dawned. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Zenobia nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've confirmed it as much as possible. We're going to have a baby, Wyatt." The joy that flooded through Wyatt was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He was around the table in an instant, lifting Zenobia from her chair and spinning her in a circle, before remembering her condition and setting her gently back on her feet. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" she asked, suddenly vulnerable despite her certainty of his reaction. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," Wyatt assured her, cradling her face in his hands. "I'm overwhelmed, overjoyed, and thoroughly terrified all at once." Zenobia laughed, the sound like music to his ears. "That makes two of us. I may be a doctor, but becoming a mother is an entirely different matter." "You'll be magnificent at both," Wyatt said with absolute conviction. The news of Zenobia's pregnancy spread through Nebraska City almost as quickly as the fever had. Women brought gifts of hand-knitted blankets and tiny clothes. Men offered Wyatt cigars and advice on fatherhood. The community that had embraced Zenobia as their doctor now celebrated her impending motherhood with equal enthusiasm. As her pregnancy progressed, Zenobia made arrangements for her practice. A young doctor from Council Bluffs, who had heard of her work, agreed to come 3 days a week to help maintain the clinic. Dr. James Warren was respectful of what Zenobia had built and seemed genuinely interested in learning from her experience with frontier medicine. "He's not you," Wyatt observed after meeting the young physician, "but he seems competent enough." "He graduated from a good medical school," Zenobia agreed, "and he doesn't seem bothered by the fact that I'm a woman. That's rare enough to be valuable." Winter brought heavy snows that sometimes isolated their ranch for days at a time. Wyatt used these periods to expand their home, adding a nursery adjacent to their bedroom and improving the kitchen to make Zenobia's work easier as her pregnancy advanced. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fire, Zenobia working on a medical text while Wyatt carved a wooden cradle, she looked up suddenly. "What if it's a girl?" Wyatt's hand stilled on the wood. "Then she'll be as beautiful and brilliant as her mother. But will she have the opportunities to study, to practice medicine if she chooses?" Zenobia's hand rested protectively over her swelling abdomen. "The world is not kind to women with ambitions." "The world is changing," Wyatt replied thoughtfully. "Slowly, perhaps, but it's changing." And our daughter, if we have a daughter, will have something many girls don't. What's that? Parents who believe in her, Wyatt said simply. A father who knows women are capable of extraordinary things and a mother who's living proof of it. Zenobia's eyes softened. When I agreed to marry you, I never imagined finding someone who would understand me so completely. When I sent for a bride, I never imagined finding the other half of my soul, Wyatt countered, setting aside his carving to join her on the sofa. Yet here we are. As spring approached, Nebraska City experienced one of its worst blizzards in memory. The storm hit in mid-March, burying the town under nearly 3 feet of snow and making travel impossible for days. Wyatt had fortunately stocked plenty of supplies, anticipating Zenobia's need for comfort in her final months of pregnancy. What he hadn't anticipated was the knock on their door during the heart of the storm. Opening it, he found Thomas Jenkins, his face nearly blue with cold, his horse barely visible through the swirling snow behind him. "It's Sarah," he gasped as Wyatt pulled him inside. "The baby's coming early. Something's wrong, she's bleeding and screaming something fierce." Zenobia appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, her own pregnancy now in its 7th month. "How long has she been in labor?" she asked, already moving toward the bedroom for her medical bag. "Started yesterday evening. Thought we had time that the storm would break." "But the bleeding started an hour ago and she's fading, Zenny. I'm afraid we're losing her." Wyatt intercepted Zenobia as she returned with her bag. "You can't go out in this," he said firmly. "Not in your condition." "I have to," she replied, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Sarah Jenkins will die without help and possibly her baby too." "Then I'm coming with you," Wyatt insisted. "We'll take the sled. It will be safer than trying to ride in this." Within minutes, they had bundled Zenobia in every available blanket and loaded her onto the sled. Wyatt hitched their strongest horse, and with Thomas riding alongside, they set out into the blinding snow. The journey to the Jenkins farm normally took 40 minutes by wagon. In the blizzard, with the sled fighting through drifts, it took over 2 hours. By the time they arrived, Zenobia was chilled despite the blankets, and Wyatt was frantic with worry for both his wife and their unborn child. Inside the farmhouse, they found Sarah Jenkins gray-faced and weak, the bed beneath her soaked with blood. Zenobia immediately took charge, examining her while giving Wyatt and Thomas instructions to boil water and find clean linens. "The baby is turned wrong," Zenobia explained to the terrified husband, "and the placenta has partially separated. I need to turn the infant and deliver quickly, or we could lose them both." What followed was the most harrowing night of Wyatt's life. He assisted Zenobia as best he could, following her calm, clear instructions despite the fear evident in her eyes. Twice Sarah lost consciousness, only to be revived by Zenobia's determined efforts. Near dawn, with the storm finally beginning to abate, Sarah Jenkins gave birth to a tiny but healthy son. The hemorrhaging slowed under Zenobia's skilled hands, and by the time the sun broke through the clouds, both mother and child were resting comfortably. "You did it," Wyatt whispered as Zenobia finally allowed him to help her into a chair, her face pale with exhaustion. "You saved them both." "We did it," she corrected him, leaning heavily against his arm. "I couldn't have managed alone." They stayed until midday, ensuring that Sarah remained stable and that the newborn was nursing properly. When they finally prepared to leave, Thomas Jenkins gripped Zenobia's hand so tightly that Wyatt feared he might hurt her. "There aren't words," the man said, his voice choked with emotion. "You risked your own life and your baby's to save my family. I'll never forget that as long as I live." The journey home was easier with the storm past, but Wyatt noticed Zenobia's unusual silence. As they approached their ranch, she finally spoke. "I was frightened, Wyatt, not of the medical challenge, but of the risk I took with our child. Was I wrong to go?" Wyatt considered her question carefully before answering. "I don't think there was a right or wrong choice there, only an impossible one. You followed your healer's instinct and your heart. I can't fault you for that, even though I was terrified for you both. If anything had happened to our baby because of my decision." "But it didn't," Wyatt reminded her gently. "And the Jenkins family is whole because of you. Sometimes life doesn't give us neat, clean choices." That night, as Zenobia slept deeply after the ordeal, Wyatt felt their baby kick against his hand where it rested on her abdomen. The strength in that tiny movement reassured him in ways words couldn't. Their child was resilient, just like its mother. April brought warmer weather and the blooming of wildflowers across the prairie. Zenobia's clinic continued to operate with Dr. Warren's assistance, though she now limited herself to consultations and paperwork, rather than direct patient care. Her due date approached, and Wyatt found himself alternating between excitement and anxiety. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing he had built the previous summer. "The nearest doctor besides you is 50 miles away." Zenobia squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Dr. Warren will be here, and Mrs. Palmer has delivered dozens of babies over the years. Between them, they have more than enough experience." "But they're not you," Wyatt insisted. "You're the one I trust, and I trust them," Zenobia replied. "Sometimes that has to be enough." When labor finally began in the first week of May, it progressed quickly. Wyatt sent their ranch hand galloping for Dr. Warren while Mrs. Palmer arrived with her usual efficiency, carrying a basket of supplies and years of practical wisdom. "This isn't my first rodeo, young man," she told Wyatt when he hovered anxiously in the bedroom doorway. "And your wife knows more about this business than most doctors, even if she is the one doing the work this time." Relegated to heating water and pacing the hallway, Wyatt found the hours of Zenobia's labor more challenging than any physical trial he had ever endured. The sounds of her pain tore at his heart, and only Dr. Warren's occasional updates kept him from breaking down the door to be at her side. Just as the sun was setting, a new cry joined Zenobia's, the strong, indignant wail of a newborn meeting the world. Moments later, Dr. Warren opened the door, his face tired but triumphant. "Congratulations, Mr. Ingram. You have a healthy son." Wyatt nearly collapsed with relief. "And Zenobia?" "Doing remarkably well," the doctor assured him. "She's already giving Mrs. Palmer instructions on postpartum care as if she weren't the patient." When Wyatt entered the bedroom, the sight of Zenobia propped against the pillows, their son cradled in her arms, imprinted itself on his heart forever. Her hair was damp with sweat, her face flushed with exertion, but the look of wonder as she gazed at their child made her more beautiful to him than ever before. "Wyatt," she whispered as he approached the bed cautiously, "come meet your son." The tiny bundle she placed in his arms weighed almost nothing, yet Wyatt felt the responsibility of it like an anchor. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, his eyes tightly shut, one tiny fist waving in the air as if protesting the indignity of birth. "He's perfect," Wyatt managed, his voice thick with emotion. "We should name him," Zenobia said, watching them together with tired satisfaction. "I was thinking perhaps William, after your father." "William," Wyatt repeated, testing the name. "William Thomas Ingram." Thomas for Jenkins, whose crisis brought us closer and nearly made us parents a bit too early. Zenobia smiled her agreement. "A fine name for a boy who will grow up knowing both the value of helping others and the love of a family." The weeks following William's birth brought adjustments to their lives that neither had fully anticipated. "Zenobia," accustomed to caring for others, found herself dependent on help for the first time in years. Wyatt discovered reserves of patience he hadn't known he possessed, as he learned to soothe a colicky infant while ensuring his wife had time to recover. The community rallied around them, bringing meals and offers of assistance. Dr. Warren continued managing the clinic, consulting with Zenobia on difficult cases, but handling day-to-day patients with increasing confidence. By midsummer, Zenobia had established a new routine. She spent mornings with William, then left him with Mrs. Palmer for a few hours while she worked at the clinic. Wyatt adjusted his ranch schedule to be home when she returned, giving her time to rest while he spent precious moments with his son. On William's 3-month birthday, they hosted a small gathering at the ranch to thank those who had supported them. As Zenobia moved among their guests, William securely cradled in one arm while she discussed treatment options for Mrs. Cooper's arthritis with the other. Wyatt was struck by how completely she embodied both her roles healer and mother. Thomas Jenkins approached him, a glass of cider in hand, and his own son, now healthy and thriving in his wife's arms nearby. "You got lucky, Ingram," he said, clapping Wyatt on the shoulder. "When you sent away for that bride, you could never have guessed what you were really getting." "No," Wyatt agreed, watching as Zenobia laughed at something Sarah Jenkins had said. "I was looking for a wife and found so much more: a partner, a healer for our community, and the love of my life, all wrapped up in one remarkable woman. Not to mention the mother of your son," Thomas added with a grin. "That too," Wyatt acknowledged, his chest tight with emotion. "Though between you and me, Jenkins, I'm hoping she might consider becoming the mother of a few more Ingrams in the years to come." As if sensing his thoughts, Zenobia looked up and caught his eye across the gathering. The smile she gave him, intimate, despite the crowd, told him she might be considering the same possibility. That evening, after their guests had departed and William was sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Wyatt and Zenobia sat together on their porch swing, watching fireflies dance above the prairie grasses. "I was thinking," Zenobia said, breaking the comfortable silence, "that the clinic has been running smoothly with Dr. Warren's help." "It has," Wyatt agreed. "He's turned out to be a good investment." "Yes, and it makes me wonder if perhaps we might consider a more permanent arrangement. He's mentioned wanting to establish his own practice, but he seems content in Nebraska City." Wyatt studied her profile in the fading light. "Are you considering stepping back from medicine?" he asked, surprised. "Not entirely," Zenobia clarified quickly. "But perhaps sharing the practice more equally. It would give me more time with William and—" She hesitated, then continued, "and perhaps with any siblings he might have in the future." Wyatt's heart leaped at her words. "Siblings, you say? I thought you might want to wait longer before considering another child." "So did I," Zenobia admitted with a small laugh. "But motherhood has surprised me. I love my work as a doctor, that hasn't changed. But being William's mother has opened a part of my heart I didn't know existed. I find I'm greedy for more of that feeling." Wyatt pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Whatever you decide about the practice, I support you. And as for more children, whenever you're ready, I'm more than willing to contribute to the cause." Zenobia laughed outright at that, the sound carrying across the darkening prairie. "How very generous of you, Mr. Ingram." "I'm known for my generosity," Wyatt replied solemnly, though his eyes danced with mischief. "Just ask anyone in Nebraska City. That Wyatt Ingram, they'll say, always willing to help with making babies." "Wyatt!" Zenobia gasped, swatting his arm even as she dissolved into giggles. "You're terrible." "And yet you love me," he reminded her, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips. "I do," she agreed, her laughter softening into something more tender. More than I ever thought possible when I stepped off that train a year ago. And I love you, Wyatt replied. The doctor, the mother, the woman, every part of you. As the stars emerged in the vast Nebraska sky, Wyatt reflected on how thoroughly his life had been transformed by the arrival of his mail-order bride. What had begun as a practical solution to loneliness had become the greatest blessing of his life. Together, they had built not just a clinic for the community but a family and a future brighter than either could have imagined alone. In the nursery, William stirred and let out a small cry. Zenobia rose automatically, but Wyatt gently pulled her back down. "I'll get him," he said, pressing a kiss to her lips before standing. "You rest." As he walked inside to tend to their son, Wyatt silently thanked whatever fate or providence had guided Zenobia Smith's hand when she answered his advertisement. In seeking a wife, he had found his heart's true companion, and Nebraska City had gained not just a doctor but a healer who had transformed their community with her skills and compassion. And in the years that followed, as their family grew to include a daughter and another son, as the clinic expanded to serve neighboring communities, and as Zenobia's reputation drew medical students eager to learn frontier medicine from a pioneering woman physician, Wyatt never forgot the mixture of fear and hope he had felt waiting on that train platform. Sometimes, he reflected, the greatest journeys began with a single letter and the courage to trust a stranger who would become the center of your world.